The Mina protocol is the world's lightest blockchain. But what does this mean, and why do I think that Mina has the potential to go to the moon? So, unlike cryptocurrency platforms like Bitcoin and Ethereum, the Mina blockchain remains exactly the same size regardless of the number of transactions happening on it. So, ever since the beginning of the Mina blockchain, it has remained at about 22 kilobytes, and that is roughly the same size as about 2 tweets. Bitcoin's blockchain, on the other hand, was about 2 gigabytes in June 2012 and is now about 400 gigabytes, give or take, and still growing as of March 2022. So, why is this important? Well, the idea of the blockchain is that power remains in the hands of the many and not the few. And so all the rules are enforced by everyone, and all the transactions are also verified by everyone too. To ensure this happens, when using things like Bitcoin and Ethereum, if a new participant joins, they have to take all this previous transaction data on the blockchain and verify all of those previous transactions. And as you can imagine, that's a hell of a lot of storage if we're using something like Bitcoin that has over or close to 400 gigabytes of data. So the people at Mina saw a big problem with this because they saw that it was becoming increasingly difficult to verify the entire blockchain. After all, not everyone has the capability to store 400 gigabytes of data on their devices. And this kind of undermined the very purpose of blockchain and its emphasis on decentralization. Because if only a handful of people can store and verify the transactions on the blockchain, then you can't really call it a decentralized network. With Mina then, no matter how many transactions are taking place, the Mina blockchain will always remain 22 kilobytes. And this fact makes the Mina blockchain the lightest blockchain in the world. So theoretically, anyone can operate a full node and store and verify transactions. So if you've got a phone, you should be able to store every single transaction that's happened using Mina. And so it's that very fact that makes Mina's blockchain truly decentralized, scalable, and secure. Apart from its 22 kilobyte limit, the Mina protocol also includes a complex cryptographic tool called zero-knowledge proofs, which is also known as ZK snarks, which further helps to reduce the size of the blockchain and also help to achieve true decentralization at scale. The basic idea of a zero-knowledge proof is that it lets you convince me that you know something or have done something without actually revealing what that secret was. So, for example, if you wanted to convince me that you knew what the answer was to 4 plus 4, you don't actually have to tell me the answer is 8. Instead, I can ask you questions like, is the answer an odd number, or is the answer a multiple of 8, and so on. And by doing that process, I can find out that you know the answer without you actually telling me, yes, the answer is 8. So for Mina, this means that instead of having to verify the entirety of the blockchain, which is clearly going to use a lot of data as it does for Bitcoin, all each participant needs to do to verify the transactions on the blockchain is to prove that the previous transaction happened correctly. And this is a process of recursive zero-knowledge proof. So we don't need to prove everything that's happened because the previous transaction already proved the transaction before that and the transaction before that. So as long as all the transactions are correct up to the previous transaction, then there's no need to verify the entire blockchain. You just need to check that the last proof was correct to ensure that the next proof is also going to be correct too. So nodes, which is the place where the blockchain is stored, so that can be anything like your phone or your computer, these nodes only need to store the latest proofs and don't need to store the entire chain. And this also helps to drastically reduce the size of the blockchain because you're never actually storing the entire blockchain on any device, you're just storing the latest proof or the latest transactions taking place. Using the power of zero-knowledge proofs or ZK snarks, which enable us to prove things without showing or giving away all the information, Mina is also built to power and enable snaps, which are these really cool decentralized apps powered by the Mina protocol, which have some really interesting use cases. The first interesting use case is private access to internet services. The Mina protocol gives huge weight and importance to privacy and the safeguarding of data. And the clearest example of this is the fact that Mina allows you to access online data and prove that you've met the requirements of online service providers without any data vulnerabilities. So let's say that I was looking for a loan online. Now, if I was using the normal internet and I applied for a loan online, I'd have to give away my credit score and other important pieces of information. Whereas if I use a decentralized app on the Mina protocol or a snap, I wouldn't actually have to give away any of this data. Instead, all I would need to do is to prove that I've met the threshold that these service providers require. So instead of giving away my credit score, Mina can just prove to that service provider that I've met their threshold without actually giving that data away. So the actual data, in this case the credit score, is never actually shared with the service providers, yet I can still access their services, in this case the loan. The second interesting use case is permissionless web oracles. So when we're talking about web oracles here, what we're really saying is something that allows us to access real-world data. So if we had a blockchain without a web oracle, we won't be able to access any data happening in the real world. For example, let's say you had a smart contract, which is basically just this self-executing contract between a buyer and seller, and it will execute as soon as a certain condition is met. So let's say you had a smart contract which was to execute as soon as the price of oil reached a certain price. Now, to ensure that happens, you would need a web oracle to access that data, the data of the price of oil. Without that web oracle, then we wouldn't have access to that data and the smart contract wouldn't work. Now, the problem with web oracles is that in order to have smart contracts that access real world data, we have to rely on third parties. And if we've got a blockchain that relies on third parties, it kind of undermines the trustless nature of the blockchain. And if we have to trust someone else, if we have to trust a third party, then there's really no point having a blockchain. You may as well just use a database. Using snaps, however, developers can take advantage of real-world data from multiple websites without getting permission from them. So Mina, unlike other cryptocurrency blockchains, doesn't need the use of a web oracle to access this data. Instead, it can just take a snapshot of the relevant data for the decentralized app from multiple websites. The third and final interesting use case is one private internet login. With Mina, users can access any internet website or service privately without giving away any data, having to sign up for accounts, or using login details. Plus, no internet service provider can block you when you're using the Mina protocol. The reason this works is because users can create a snap-based login account with their email addresses, and so whenever you're accessing these websites or these services, instead of having to create accounts and log in that way, instead the snap can prove you own the underlying email address and give you access to those websites without giving away any of your data. So in other words, these websites can prove it's you that's logging into their website without having to give them any of your data up front. So hopefully by now you can see that the Mina protocol is pretty cool. But what are my thoughts about the future of Mina and where it's going? Well, if the crypto community is correct, the Mina protocol might be one of the most undervalued hidden gems in the blockchain ecosystem. I definitely think that Mina has a lot of room for growth, and I'd probably give it this conservative price prediction of about $80 to $100 over the next 5 years. Given that the price of Mina right now is less than $2, this could 100% be on its way to the moon, and there's still time to hop on board before it really takes off.